parents arrived at Monty's wedding in New York, everything went well until his Aunt Laura and his cousin Ethan started to insult them. Uncle Thomas tried to calm things down, but he wasn't having any luck.
"You know, Dad, I think you're the one who drank too much. I can't believe you're actually siding with them," Ethan said with a sneer. "Uncle Al and Aunt Susan, what possessed you to come here?"
Actually, ever since they were kids, Ethan had never liked Kevin all that much. Even though he was older, it seemed that Kevin was always better than him, no matter what they were doing. The family had decided to expel Kevin as punishment after his failure in a large investment. But later on, when Kevin's luck turned around and he became super wealthy, Uncle Thomas went and tracked him down to ask him to take over as CEO of Williams Media, as long as he saved the family from bankruptcy. Ethan was jealous because he'd been running the company up until they needed the bailout from Kevin. How could he ever get over a humiliation like that? "Ethan, let's not argue on Monty's wedding day. It won't go well for you," Kevin said coldly. Kevin didn't mind being insulted, but he absolutely couldn't stand seeing his parents treated like this.
"What? Did I hear you right? Are you saying you don't want to argue with me?"
Ethan laughed and said,
"What are you going to do about it? You couldn't take me anyway." "Enough. What are you guys doing? We're all family," Thomas said angrily. "Why do you guys always have to fight?"
"Who said we're related?" Laura sneered. "Just look at what they're wearing. They look like a bunch of vagrants who have come to crash the wedding." When Laura finished speaking, Alan's face suddenly turned pale. He moaned and collapsed on the floor. "Dad, what's wrong?" Kevin said as he knelt down and cradled his father. "Alan, you're scaring me," Susan said in a panic. Kevin immediately took out his phone and dialed 911. Then he looked up and glared at Ethan and Laura. He knew very well that his father had collapsed from holding in the anger that was boiling up inside him while he was listening to Laura and Ethan's insults. "Ethan, if something happens to my father, I'll hold you personally responsible," Kevin said bitterly. He could feel the adrenaline building up inside him. Ethan turned his head and looked away. Then Kevin suddenly looked at his Uncle Thomas and said, "It seems I made a bad choice lending money to the Williams family. I think I may just pull out my $8 billion and head back to Chicago." Everyone who heard this was stunned. They knew that Kevin had been shut out years ago, so where did he find $8 billion? Laura put her hands on her hips and snapped at Kevin. "You seem to be confused. Why do you think we'd lend you any money?" "I think you've had a little too much to drink already. I'm not asking for a loan. I gave you the loan. I lent $8 billion to the family to bail them out of the mess they'd gotten into. Just ask Uncle Thomas. He wrote up the contract," Kevin said firmly. Thomas was appalled, and it showed on his face. He quickly walked over to Laura and pulled her away by the elbow. "What's going on?" Laura asked him. "What's he talking about?" Ethan was confused too.
"Dad, what are you doing?"
He was naturally protective of his mother. Monty heard all the noise and rushed over with Hannah.
"Kevin, what happened to Uncle Alan?"
Monty asked nervously. Kevin didn't answer him. He just stared at Thomas coldly and said, "I'll give you 1 day, Uncle Thomas. At this time tomorrow, I'm coming back for my money." Then he picked up his father from the floor and walked carefully towards the door. Suddenly, Ethan roared,
"Stop! Who said you could leave?" "Ethan, what are you talking about?"
Monty said unhappily.
"Monty, this is none of your business. Stay out of it," Ethan said with a ferocious expression on his face. "If you weren't getting married today, I wouldn't have even wasted my time talking to you."
It made Monty sad to hear this, but he took a step back. Monty was only tied to the Williams family through marriage, so he didn't have much say in things, especially compared to Ethan. An ambulance soon arrived at the mansion's entrance. Kevin helped them load his father in the van, and his mother rode along with them. Kevin would follow them as soon as he could. As the ambulance drove away with its siren blaring, Kevin turned around and went back inside. Ethan was the first to jump up.
"Don't you get it? You've already ruined Monty's wedding. Why the hell did you come back?"
"Who says I can't come back?" Kevin said coldly.
"You're no longer a member of this family. You just aren't welcome here. Get the hell out right now," Ethan said viciously.
As far as Ethan was concerned, it was because of Kevin that he'd lost his place in Williams Media. And he thought that Kevin had just embarrassed his mother Laura in front of the entire family, so he really had it in for Kevin.
"Shut up,"
Thomas told him. Then he pointed to the other side of the room and said,
"Now go wait over there and don't say another word."
Then Thomas turned around and looked at Kevin. He smiled awkwardly and said,
"Kevin, we're all family here. Let's work this out."
"No, Ethan just said that I'm no longer a member of this family," Kevin said blankly. His face didn't show any expression at all. Nothing his uncle said could get him to change his mind.
"But Kevin, how can you talk to Uncle Thomas like this?"
Monty asked worriedly. "Monty Aspinwall," and Kevin emphasized that his cousin had a different last name. "Don't worry. Tomorrow you can come over to Williams Media for a job. Some people don't want to see us succeed. Well, I guess you can't please everyone." Then Kevin gave Ethan a nasty look.
"Kevin, I don't know what to say,"
Monty replied, shaking his head. Thomas was at a loss for words too. After all, this whole mess had been caused by his wife and his son. "Uncle Thomas, remember what I said. I'll be back tomorrow for my money," Kevin warned his uncle. Then he turned around and looked at Monty. He took a deep breath and said, "I'm so sorry I messed up your wedding, Monty." He took a beautifully decorated gift envelope out of his pocket and handed it to his cousin. It was the one Miss Wilson had prepared for him with a very generous check inside. "You don't have to put up with this. Come to Chicago." Without giving Monty any time to react, Kevin patted him on the shoulder and left the mansion. He knew his father was still unconscious, so he had to rush to the hospital immediately. As Thomas watched Kevin walk away, he turned to his son and shook his head.
"This is all because of you,"
Uncle Thomas said menacingly. Kevin got to the hospital within 20 minutes and saw that his father wasn't being treated yet. Instead, his gurney was just sitting in the corridor. His mother was pleading with the nurse, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please help him. I'll give you anything you want as soon as my son gets here." "I'm sorry, but the administrator already told you. This is a private hospital and you have no insurance coverage. We can keep him stable, but there's nothing else we can do other than have him transferred to one of the city hospitals," the nurse said sternly. After Alan and Susan left Chicago to live in the countryside, their income came from selling vegetables. They'd managed to save a little money, but certainly not enough to pay for an operation. The intake administrator had sized them up and figured their son probably couldn't afford treatment either. She didn't want to risk a reprimand if Alan went into the operating room without approval. When Susan saw her son walk in, she immediately calmed down. "Kevin, we're over here. Quickly tell them to go ahead and operate on your father." "Mom, what's going on?" Kevin asked in confusion. He didn't know why his mother looked so distraught. "They said that if we can't afford the surgery, all they can do is stabilize him," Susan said as she wiped tears from her face. "What kind of hospital is this? A human life is at stake, and you want to get paid first?" Kevin's expression became instantly cold. "I'll cover everything. Now send him to surgery immediately." "Your father's stable, but he needs our hospital's chief specialist. The bill for this kind of surgery is $120,000, the administrator said impatiently. "I just explained this to your mother, and she said that you would give it to her as soon as you arrive. Do you have $120,000 on you?" "I said I'll pay you. You need to operate on him immediately," Kevin said through his gritted teeth. The administrator didn't believe him and insisted that he pay immediately. Kevin couldn't take this any longer and shouted so loud that you could hear him in the parking lot. "I told you to arrange the surgery immediately." The nurse was frightened by Kevin's outburst and her face turned pale. Everyone up and down the corridor began to wonder what was happening. They assumed that Kevin and his parents couldn't afford to pay for treatment and were fighting with the hospital administrator. Just then, the hospital director arrived with a few security guards. At the same moment, Kevin's phone rang. When he saw that it was Quinn calling, Kevin answered. Before Kevin could say anything, Quinn explained, "Mr. Williams, I know you're in my hospital right now. Wait for me right there. I'll be down there as soon as I can." Then he hung up.
"What's going on here?" the director asked in a very serious tone.
"Director, thank you for coming so quickly. These two people can't afford to pay the medical fees and are insisting on treatment. We've already stabilized the patient, and there's nothing else we can do. Their son was just yelling at me, and if you hadn't brought security, I'm sure he would have hit me." She exaggerated to make herself look good. Hearing this, the director slowly walked over to Kevin and said, "Young man, I can understand your feelings, but the hospital has its rules and regulations. As long as you can arrange payment, we will immediately prepare your father for surgery." "Pay first? What kind of hospital is this?" Kevin said loudly.
"Those are the rules. All we are required to do is stabilize a patient. If our administrator believes the payment will not be possible, we are not required to do anything more. If you continue to cause trouble, I'll ask security to have you removed from the property," the hospital director threatened.
"All this for just $120,000? I'll give it to you now," Kevin grumbled as he slapped his bank card on the counter. The director took one look at Kevin's black card and stared at him in shock. Then he said,
"I'm sorry, but we don't accept fake cards."
Kevin was so frustrated. His father lay there dying, and he couldn't get anyone to...
Hi guys, Kevin here. Listen to full episodes of Insta Empire exclusively on the Pocket FM app. Click the link in the description to install the app now.